So I would like to present to you my view of what it's going to be like to live in a city 30 to 50 years from now by showing you what it's like to live in a city today. And in order to know what that's like, you have to go back in time. So we first of all have to admit that we've grown to a large number, and now we dominate all of Earth's natural systems. We are in control. That's a joke. We're not in control. We just think we're in control until things go out of control, as that wonderful presentation about what's going to happen for the next 30 years, perhaps what the weather tells us. So what were yesterday's visions? What if this were, let's say, for instance, Buckminster Fuller up here instead of me? What would he tell you? And he would tell you that the environment is changing, and we have to do something. What do we have to do? We have to seal ourselves off from it. We have to protect us from a deteriorating world that we are creating by putting a bubble over our cities and living within our means, because nature is not our friend. We have made it our enemy. That's basically what he would say. He would say it in a different way, perhaps less dramatic, with all of the technical know-how to actually construct a dome over New York City. Then this movie came out, Metropolis, which showed us this cold, technological vision of what it might be like to live in a city of tomorrow, a sterile, community-less city. No friends, no enemies, just going to work and coming home and going to work and coming home. Well, that's basically what I do anyway, but with a smile on my face, perhaps. And today, if you fast forward this today, Buckminster Fuller was a little bit off. Now we have to protect our plants from us. We protect the natural world from us. This is the Eden Project in England that has domed, captured tropical plants that are endangered. And what they're doing here is that they're protecting these plants from further destruction in their habitat, with the hope that someday their habitat may return. And we can take these plants and put them back where they came from. What an opposite view that is from 30 years before World War II. And our view of the future is dictated by the media. So this is a Jetson-like view of what it's like to live perhaps 100 years from now. But notice also all the domes, the sealing off of, the prevention of contact with nature. And yet, some 200,000 years ago, we arose from a non-human species of hominid on the plains of Africa through a very natural process. And ever since then, we've been trying to dissociate ourselves from that process, apparently, particularly with the invention of agriculture. So today, we find ourselves in some amazing situations. Not having enough safe and abundant water, our food security and safety issues are at stake. We are unable to engage society fully in the sustainability of our planet, and we're still dependent on fossil fuels, and they've just found a whole bunch off the coast of Brazil, so don't wait for the oil reserves to run out just yet. Today we are 6.9 billion of us, and we require the size of South America to grow our food. 10,000 years ago, there were 1 million of us, and we didn't farm. What an amazing progression in just 10,000 years of our 200,000-year history. Our population has grown too. And I'm not saying anything negative or positive about this. I'm just presenting you with what the facts are. And in another 30 to 50 years, we might have another 3 billion mouths to feed. Collectively, as one species. We must behave as one species in order to do this. So if 6.9 billion need this much land, another 3 billion will need the size of Brazil. Brazil's bigger in landmass than the contiguous 48 states in the United States. So Brazil isn't likely to give up their possessions right away. They'll probably want to use their own land for their own purposes. I've been told this, perhaps without any way of confirming it, but I believe it anyway, that The Brazilian rainforest supplies over 40% of the world's atmospheric oxygen. So just getting rid of it, even if that number is inaccurate, even if we're off by a factor of 2, the fact is if we cut it all down in favor of farmland to make room for the next 3 billion people in terms of their food, there'll be some problems to pay for every one of us. If this is how much land there is, this is how much land we farm. There's not a Brazil-sized left land mass to feed those 3 billion people. So what are we going to do? Well, here's what we did. We invented agriculture, and today it requires 20% of the fossil fuel use in the United States just to farm. That's $700 billion worth of fossil fuel, by the way. We use herbicides and fertilizers and pesticides, and 70% of the water that's available for freshwater use we use on our plants to grow our foods. Granted, we do get our food, but we also produce one of the world's largest polluters, agricultural runoff. And agricultural runoff has a huge effect on the world, not just on the politics, but on everyday life. We've had an enormous flood this year in our country, and you're reading in the papers now that Southeast Asia is going through a similar flood. And 3 weeks ago, Pakistan and India went through a similar flood, and last year, China. And you pick up the paper, and every single day now, you're reading about some natural disaster someplace in the world, either related to floods or poor Texas, with no water at all, as its second major drought, in the last 5 years. That's trashed about $5 billion worth of produce this year. And 5 years ago, only $4.1 billion, but if you adjust for inflation, it's probably $6 billion. So you've got $10 billion worth of lost food and produce and cotton and all sorts of other things from just one little state in the United States. If that goes on forever, of course, it can't. And we've seen this graph already. This graph shows what happens to the price of food when the price of oil goes up. It doubles. So if your 50% income goes to food for your family 2 years ago, it's now 100% of your income. And what are those people going to do? Another fact that we can't avoid looking at is urbanization. And urbanization occurs when times get tough in the countryside. People start moving to the city. So people from India and China that used to farm but can't anymore have moved to the city, looking to cities for social services that perhaps will rescue them from a starvation and doom and gloom. No hope. Cities only occupy 2 to 3% of the land mass of the whole planet, and yet it produces 70% of the carbon emissions. That's what's causing the rapidity of climate to change. It's not that climate won't change without us, it certainly will, but the rapidity is. Collectively, the human species behaves like a gigantic volcano. I got a nod from our weatherman, thank God. Because I've been using that analogy for a long time now. We just look like one big giant volcano spewing out all this CO2, and we can alter the atmosphere this way, no problem. No particulates, however. Cities, black boxes. Resources in, we use them up, we discard. That's our mantra. Yesterday's cities did that too, and that's why they're no longer here. So my question to you is, will we still be here in another 50 years? Will cities, despite the fact that adverse weather events may affect cities the way they function, will we just outstrip our resources and simply fade away, as Jared Diamond would have us believe, perhaps? So my question to you in this room, if we could just seal it off, have food stuck under the door, and put our collective minds together to try to solve this problem, we've got two, is one is our problem, and two, it's the rest of the world's problem. Because if we don't do that second one, our lives on this planet are finite in terms of not our evolution, but in this case, we've ended up shooting ourselves in both feet with our own bullets. I'm very hopeful that we can do both of these things. And we can solve them by thinking about them carefully, by weighing our options, and then exploring all of those options, not just some of those options, and setting aside our prejudices and biases as to which ones we prefer, take a scientific approach to trying them out first to see if they have some merit. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? By the way, we spent a lot of money going out into space and collecting dust from the tail of a comet. We then brought it back and analyzed it to find out if comets formed at the same time that our solar system formed, to only find out that they formed about 1 million years later. Take that home with you and remember how many hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of dollars we spent getting that answer without looking at these as solvable problems, and then go out and collect the dust from the tail of that comet. Because I wanted to know the answer to that too. But first, I wanted to make sure that everybody on this planet has enough to eat and enough to drink. One of our solutions that we've thought about in my class that I used to teach, and my 106 graduate students thought through too over a 10-year period, was perhaps indoor farming offers us a solution to some of these problems. We know how to do this because this doesn't look like a greenhouse in your memory, I'm sure. But that's what the modern day greenhouses are starting to look like. And inside those greenhouses, you'll find interesting technologies being applied to growing food. Hydroponics, aeroponics, and aquaponics dominate the scene. The improvement of LED lighting for the energy source as to how these plants actually survive inside, and the adjustment and maintenance of their nutrition, and making sure that their root systems have enough oxygen, et cetera, has opened the door to a new industry, indoor farming on a grand scale. Here are some of the crops, and I know you can't read these things, but everything that hits your taste buds that you'd use in some dish that you go home and cook, you can find them on these lists of commercially available hydroponic foods produced throughout the world. So there's no shortage of knowing how to do these things. So if you put those two ideas together, indoor farming and lots of technology, you get what we came up with as a partial solution to the world's food crisis, and that is vertical farming. I'm also going to accuse myself of having known Albert Einstein. I never met the man. I regret not having done that. But I heard a quote from him, at least someone said he said this, but there's no way to verify that now, unfortunately. He said once, quotes, "If your idea doesn't sound crazy, it's probably not a good one." This idea really sounded crazy, especially the fact that I come from New Jersey, the Garden State. So if you could vertically farm instead, here are the advantages. No agricultural runoff, that saves the oceans and the estuaries from disaster. Year-round crop production, so you don't have to worry about whether strawberries are in season or not, or green beans or squash or anything else. No crops lost from severe weather events, unless, of course, it's a tornado. Then you have to rebuild. I'm sorry, but you have to rebuild it. But I think you can make hurricane-resistant indoor farming actually work. I probably didn't tell you where I was born, New Orleans. Uses less water than outdoor farming, much less. No agrochemicals to ward off weeds and insects. Simply build your buildings tight and you've got it made. Allows the restoration of damaged ecosystems. That's the one I'm most passionate about because I want to restore Earth's ecosystems to some semblance of what they used to be, and farming has had the most impact on those systems. More advantages. We can remediate gray water. That means the drinking water supply goes up. You can double or triple it simply by using plants to remediate it. You can create lots of new jobs. Every mayor likes to hear this. Every governor, every president, every director. Supplies fresh produce for inner city dwellers. Uses abandoned city properties. Mayors, again, love to hear that. You can grow biofuels and other plants, too. So creating the eco-city, that's what we want to do, using this technology. And look to nature for the solution, because nature has invented something that we have to follow, and that is the ecosystem. We have to use our technology to create a sustainable, technology-driven ecosystem within the city and remove Buckminster Fuller's bubble from it and make it look like this so that there's no difference between the inside and the outside. There's no difference between city limits and city parks and woods and streams and verdant fields. I want my trout streams back. That's what I do for a hobby. You know how far I have to fly now from New York City to find a viable trout stream? a real good one where almost nobody else goes. I have to go to Montana. That's crazy. So we know how to do all of this. We have the tools. We can sustain ourselves by thinking about recycling all of these issues related to food. And if we do follow the lead of certain other cities, in this Santa Ana, California is one of them, it takes black water and turns it into drinking water. Japan takes all of its waste now, and instead of nuclear power plants, I can tell you in another 10 years, it'll all be plasma gasification. That's vaporizing everything back to its elements. The good news is this. Up until last year, if I had been invited here, and this was last year, you would have heard about the possibility of vertical farms. Not such a crazy idea now, huh? Well, guess what? These are all real. Let me show you. That's me. Not the building, the guy and the other. Tasting some unidentified green vegetable. Here's the one in Japan, the size of a 747 hangar. Here's the one in Holland going underground. Of course, leave it to them to think of another clever way to use space. All grow lights, by the way. Here's one in Seattle that's going up. There's one that's already up in Chicago. So here's my finish. Can't believe this, but I've got 30 seconds left. Almost feel like telling you a joke, but I don't know any. We have to save water, otherwise you won't be able to drink. You won't be able to live. We have to farm smart. We have to keep our green planet and blue planet, those two colors. Thanks.